The following is a co-production of KQED and the Center for Investigative Reporting.
The system of corrections itself is failing. With a cost of $50,000 per inmate, this is not a sustainable system.
Governor Jerry Brown's historic overhaul of California's criminal justice system is now underway and being watched nationwide as a model. How well is it working?
We have helped solve the state's overcrowding problem. However, it's not solving our own problems here.
I would prefer to go to prison. There's no programs here. There's no school, there's no education.
They're eligible for release if there's no room at the inn, and a lot of times there is not.
We're proving that we're not being soft on crime. We're proving that we're being smart on crime.
Coming up, an inside look at this changing of the guard. Hello, I'm Scott Shafer with this special broadcast of Prison Break. California rethinks criminal justice. California is under federal court order to reduce prison overcrowding and improve inmate health care. In October of 2011, the state launched Governor Jerry Brown's reform program, what he's calling public safety realignment. In a nutshell, realignment requires counties to handle and supervise thousands of low-level offenders in local jails and probation departments. Later, I'll talk with two district attorneys, Steve Cooley from Los Angeles and San Francisco's George Gascon. But first, reporter Michael Montgomery takes a look at a pair of counties with two very different approaches to realignment, and so far, very. And joining me now, two local law enforcement officials who have a lot to say about how realignment is being implemented in their counties. Steve Cooley is the district attorney in Los Angeles County, and George Gascon, district attorney in San Francisco. Steve Cooley, let me begin with you. We've heard realignment described as a big shift in thinking on criminal justice. What do you think is at stake for local law enforcement and public safety with realignment?
Well, it certainly is revolutionary. It certainly is a big change, and it is predictably going to be the worst thing to happen to the law-abiding public, certainly in my 40-year career in law enforcement and public prosecution. The crime rates are going to go up, predictably, because people that should be in prison are going to be out of prison. The infrastructure to handle the sheer number of prisoners sentenced to county jail to serve their state prison sentences are such that it's not going to work.
Well, what evidence is there already in Los Angeles, if any? It's only been a few months. Are you saying already it's failing?
I won't say it's failing, but the crime rate is going up in Los Angeles County. There are reports out there. Every report I've read from the various counties indicates that property crimes are going up. This is anecdotal evidence, of course. And in certain counties, Los Angeles County, our violent crime is up 6%. In the last year. This is probably because of those individuals who are out among us, should be on parole, under parole supervision, or in prison, aren't.
Mr. Gascon, do you think that it's inevitable, whether or not you support realignment, which I believe you do, is it inevitable that when you release this many people into the community at a time, that crime is going to go up, property crime at the very least?
You know, I think that we need to step back for a second and look at what has been going on. And really, we need to have the courage to say that what we have done hasn't worked very well. We have a recidivism rate in the state that is approximately 70%. That means that about 70% of the people that we send to prison go back and they reoffend. And any time that someone reoffends, they're not making us safer. They are creating new victims. That means to me that we need to start exploring a different approach. If you look at our budget, if you look at the fact that our correction budget has nearly doubled in the last 10 years, from about $5 billion to $9 billion. If you look at the fact that since 1979, we have gone from approximately 3% of our state budget being dedicated to correction to 11% now. Our system is screaming for a different way of doing business. Now, if you fast forward, you look at San Francisco today, we have taken a different approach. We have really said, you know, we're going to do everything that we can to make this work, and we're going to learn as we go. You look at the way that we're dealing with the people that are coming to our county, the reality is that our people that are failing in the early stages have dropped significantly.
But how do you, how do you avoid the tag of being soft on crime? Because there are those who say, well, you're giving these guys a lot of extra chances. I mean, the recidivism rate was high, you're right, under the old system.
I can tell you that any time that somebody reoffends, and we had a way to prevent that, and we can do it in a more thoughtful, more economically feasible, more socially responsible way, that's not being soft on crime. That's being effective on crime. I don't believe that we have to incarcerate people at the rates that we were before. One size does not fit all. When we put non-violent people and we mix them with violent people, generally they become violent themselves.
Steve Cooley, how do you see that, the recidivism rate? I mean, a lot of people, including Jerry Brown, point to the 73% recidivism rate and say the system wasn't working. Do you see it that way?
Well, some people could say the fact that law enforcement was able to identify individuals on parole for committing new crimes or for violating their parole showed they were doing their job and identifying those people who are the criminals and putting them back in to protect society. The real measure here is not recidivism. The real measure, and George didn't really touch on this, but it's the big elephant in the room, is crime rate. 2 years ago, at least in Los Angeles County, and I think generally throughout California, crime rate was at a 60-year low because those in positions of authority, law enforcement, law-abiding citizens, prosecutors, judges, were identifying those individuals who should not be among us in society and removing them from society.
But can't the counties do that and maybe even do it more efficiently?
Not necessarily, because they haven't got the facilities. Right now in Los Angeles County, misdemeanors sentenced to any amount of time do virtually no time. People sentenced to county jail as a condition of felony probation do no time because the system is now being packed, very seriously packed, with our non-violators under AB 109, sentenced to state prison, but going to county jail.
Well, and let me ask you about that, the non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual. That was how it was sold to counties and to the state by the governor and by Matt Cate, the head of CDCR, the Corrections Department. But that's only the most recent offense, right, is non-serious and non-violent. I mean, aren't you ending up with more and more people in the jail who have very serious, in some cases, violent pasts?
No, it is correct. It is the most recent offense that is being dealt with. But I think we need to go back for a second here. I think that the system that we came from is a system that view primarily this as a law enforcement problem, right? Crime was a law enforcement problem. You lock them up, you put them in prison, and you wait until they come back out again. Often, a lot of the people that we deal with are people that are in need of a tremendous amount of supervision and services that, quite frankly, the prison system was not providing. And that's why we continue to have this reoffending over and over again. I think that what we need to do is we need to start exploring a different formula, especially for people that in their last offense, they did not commit a violent offense. Some people will reoffend. The question becomes whether you want to reincarcerate them or do you want to be able to work through another system.
Do you think it's possible that in some places that there is a network at the county level, at the local level, that could deal better with some of these issues that George Gascon is talking about, substance abuse, mental health issues, than the state did?
Well, I think that using the state as sort of the standard, yes, I think many counties can do better than the state. In Los Angeles County, we had an incredibly successful drug court program. We have a women's reentry program, very, very successful and award-winning. Veterans Court. We were doing lots of good things, as was San Francisco and some other counties, in terms of providing something solid on the rehabilitation front for certain individuals that a judge decided would benefit from that kind of a program. And the judges are also making very discreet decisions, according to law, that some of these people belonged in prison. And I believe that the incarceration rates that we achieved, albeit high, is a reason we have the lowest crime rate in 60 years. It's been cut by it was 1/3 of its former rate. Yeah. That's because the right people were not out there in a position to commit those crimes.
So as the jail population starts to go up, who decides who gets out of jail early in order to make room for more jail prisoners?
Well, I mean, certainly the legislation puts, the sheriff department certainly has the ability to release people if they run out of space. But the question really, I think, is a more basic question and starts a little early on, is how do the prosecution works the case early on to determine with probation and with the other partners, what kind of outcome we want to look for. I agree with Steve that the crime certainly in the 1970s was horrendous, not only in LA County, but really around the nation. But if you look around crime nationwide, you can look at places like New York and many other parts of the country that have taken a slightly different approach than we have, and their crime rates have gone down just as much. As a matter of fact, if you look at the California example, you look at the incarceration rates in San Francisco, which have been traditionally lower than most other counties, and yet our crime rates have gone down just as much as they have in other counties. So I think that equating incarceration rates with public safety often leaves a question that hasn't been answered.
Going forward, Steve Cooley, you mentioned crime rate is going to be the real determinant about whether this is succeeding or not. But
well, that should be the measure. I mean, our whole idea of the criminal justice system is to hopefully achieve the lowest potential crime rate, the lowest victimization of our fellow citizens by the criminal element.
And what about you in terms of how you're going to judge whether this is failing or succeeding or whether it needs to be tweaked? What are you going to be looking at?
You know, ultimately, I agree with Steve. I mean, the measure of success at the end of the day has to be, do we have a safer community? And part of having a safer community certainly is having less crime. But I think that there is a larger picture. I think that we also have to look at what are we doing, not only in terms of reducing crime, but what are we doing? Are we creating a more livable community? Are we creating an environment where we're not over-incarcerating, especially populations that have been over-incarcerated for the last 2 or 3 decades, and creating a vacuum where you have a lack of role models? I think that we can do both. I think that we can lower crime. I think we can lower recidivism and have a more livable community, a safer community. I don't think incarceration by itself is the answer.
How concerned are you that this is just punting the problem down to the counties and that some of the lawsuits that triggered all this at the state level are now going to befall counties like LA? I'm
very, very concerned. First of all, when the state gave this to the counties, so-called realignment, they did not transfer the immunities that were in place for states against lawsuits. Those were not transferred to sheriffs. You're going to see lawsuits all over the state of California against counties for what? The same problems that afflicted the state prison system: overcrowding, lack of health care, lack of proper mental health. So I warn all the sheriffs out there, all the county board of supervisors, get ready. You're going to get sued because you're going to have the same problems that the state had.
All right, Steve Cooley, George Gascon, thank you so much for talking with us about this very important topic. And you'll find much more on our website. It's kqednews.org/prisons. You'll find a county-by-county analysis of how realignment is playing out where you live. Plus, you'll find links to my reporting in Los Angeles on how realignment is affecting inmates and people getting out of prison and jail with mental health problems. All that and much more. Again, it's kqednews.org/prisons. I'm Scott Shafer. Thanks so much for watching.